Welcome to the Feel Good Club podcast, the place to explore practices, ancient and modern, that help us to live well each day. Whether you're returning after a few years or joining for the first time, thank you for being here. It's been almost 3 years since I sat behind this microphone to record, and for good reasons. And many things have changed in my own life, but one thing hasn't. My deep curiosity about what it truly means to live well and to keep coming back home to ourselves each day. This podcast has always been a place to pause, reflect, connect, and to explore ancient and modern day practices that help us to navigate life. And with a greater awareness, compassion, and intention, that really is the purpose of this podcast. And I've contributed teaching Showcase Wellbeing. I have continued with the practices of yoga and philosophy and kirtan and chanting and breathing and mindfulness practices over the last few years, but I have also been studying deeper into psychology. And I've just recently graduated with my undergrad for degree, and I'm now moving on to the next chapter, which will be to study clinical psychology. And I've realised something in those last 3 years, that the questions I have actually are endless. They're never going to be fully answered. And not because I'm not satisfied really with the answers or satisfied with life, but I just think that there should be a curiosity, there should be intrigue into this beautiful life that we've been gifted in the hard times and in the wonderful times. So over this next chapter of my life, I'm hoping to bring you along in the podcast, but also in classes and on demand, wherever you may be, wherever you may join this community. And I'm going to continue to explore these topics of well-being that will bring in psychology, they'll bring in philosophy, yoga, of course, mindfulness, spirituality, and art. And all of those modalities, they all have a beautiful way of interweaving with one another. They're very different and unique in their nature, but they interweave. And so it's going to be my mission alongside you listening to try and help bring some clarity and see how we can bring all of these different wonderful modalities into our day-to-day life to truly live well and to be liberated whilst we live. So I'm going to keep sharing each week with a new practice or a theme, and that will also be built into our practices within the studios and online. And I hope you join me. I hope you join for this exploration together, and I hope you find it purposeful in your life, whatever the theme may be. So let's begin the show. So today's theme is one of self-study, which is actually one of the 4th niyamas in yoga philosophy. And we can also look at this theme as being something that's probably quite well recognized in modern day life. Maybe we have heard of it as self-reflection, self-awareness, maybe self-development. And self-study really, as an ancient practice in yoga, is called Svādhyāya, and it's often translated to self-study, self-reflection. And it may also be recognised from really early on in our years as maybe just having our own little diary, having a lock and a key when we were young children and putting all of our precious thoughts and maybe secrets into the diary. And that is really a way from early on in our lives of having this moment of recognizing what we have gone through in that day, maybe how we felt about it, how it was embodied, and being creative really with what we want to do with that. So from early on, many of us will have experienced this skill, this practice of self-study. But today I'm just going to go a little bit deeper into what that could really look like, what it means to self-study, kind of what's the research that is behind it, and where we may bring this practice into our day-to-day lives. So maybe as an adult you've experienced in a work or professional capacity a personal development review, say in your workplace or maybe in your own business. You might have had some questionnaires to fill out, maybe for medical or health reasons. And I think what it does is it puts us into a place of stepping out of ourselves for a moment when we have to think about what it is that we have maybe succeeded with. What are our strengths? Where is our key areas for development? Maybe where are we struggling? Where are our weaknesses at? And a lot of the time, we will find ourselves really truly reflecting without being overly critical, but really starting to have a level of grace and compassion. So to self-study doesn't have to be overly critical. It is actually a way of us building confidence in our day-to-day life. And in ancient practices such as yoga, this could often be expressed as maybe studying spiritual scripts, something like maybe the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali or the Bhagavad Gita. Having an opportunity to just sit down and look through spiritual scriptures could give a moment of realization. So within that modality of yoga, it is actually something that is a personal practice that is encouraged to have happen every day. It could also be something like a personal spiritual practice as part of self-study, where you maybe sit with yourself for 5 minutes and just meditate or chant, and you allow yourself to kind of get out of the fluctuations of the mind just for a brief moment and really get to hear that inner voice. That could also be classed as self-study. Whatever it is, what we would like to try and explore with this as a practice of self-reflection is a moment where we actually cultivate some level of discipline around self-awareness. And in psychology, actually, it's known as a professional standard, something that I'm having to get used to at the moment. And that anybody who works as a practitioner within psychology, whether that be a psychologist or a psychotherapist, even counsellors within psychology and therapeutic support, it's part of the code of conduct, the ethics that we would have one-to-one with our supervisors to offer this level of self-reflection opportunity. And it really forms part of being able to see where boundaries are within professional and personal capacities, but also maybe where we're bringing bits of our own history or personality or choices or values into a workspace. And it's really quite important that it happens, because we don't obviously want to bring our own baggage into that support area with another person or with a client. So as a professional standard, self-study, self-reflection within a psychological perspective is something that is necessary. So it kind of got me to thinking, well, if it's necessary within a professional perspective, why wouldn't we recognize that it's necessary on a personal level? And this is really what kind of got the inspiration flowing for the first episode today, really. I think it's a perfect place to start, just to become aware for myself as well. Even today, how do I feel about recording this first episode? And I'll reflect after recording, probably when I'm editing it. In fact, I'll reflect over, how I got my point across, or how did How did the information I provided, was it there, and was it with intention? Was I saying too many for example? And so I think having this opportunity to self-reflect, it allows us to really compartmentalize moments and chapters and also layers of ourselves on a day-to-day basis. It could, I was thinking about this as well, it could also show up in your life, self-awareness, self-study, in efforts towards others. So it might be that you have a selfless service. Maybe you volunteer. Maybe you go and help somebody that is struggling in a car park. I saw someone the other day that was struggling to pay on the payment display screens in a car park. And normally I wouldn't go over and intrude, but I could see this person was struggling, and I thought maybe they'll be a little bit embarrassed if I go over to say that I've noticed, but I kind of took the leap of faith and helped. And it was a selfless act on my behalf because I didn't know how that person was going to respond to me recognizing there was a struggle there. And of course, afterwards, she was really grateful, this person, for my help. And I realized in that moment, through me being selfless and not thinking about myself, it actually did help to encourage some level of feeling, I suppose, better, not only about myself, but also understanding why did I choose to not go over to start with? What evidence did I have that this person would react negatively to me going over and supporting them? So it did open up a little bit of a can of worms, really, in allowing me to understand what was my thought patterns with that. And I think we can get ourselves bogged down in overanalyzing. I know I certainly do, overanalyzing different situations and moments. So being able to be of service to others, when we allow ourselves to let the ego of our personal game move away and find a connection of how to show up on the world on behalf of others, can also be an opportunity for us to self-study. So anything really that you can think of that can actively cultivate this moment of recognizing how we think, how we move, could even be on a yoga mat or going for a coastal run or a trail run or going to the gym, how you move, how you feel in that moment of moving, and being able to reflect on that, and as a regular practice becomes part of self-study. Now, if you're really kind of techie, it might be that you could self-study through stats. So you might have a mod con of being able to monitor your heart rate. You may have a new health type ring that allows you to track your sleep or your heart rate. Anything that allows you to just peel away a layer of ourselves and get into the nitty-gritty of ourselves is a level of self-study. Now, what is it that actually self-study can do to transform us at times of maybe overthinking? Because it can cross over self-study to being highly critical. You heard me mention just then about overanalyzing. Self-study at times can turn us into the other paradigm of going overboard with how critical maybe we could be in an attempt to better ourselves. And we don't really want that with self-study. We don't want to feel that we're doing it for a purpose of great change or to compel us to be better in some way. This is really about not seeing ourselves as broken, but seeing ourselves as whole and just allowing ourselves to evolve and transform over time. So when we do practice self-study, it is a way of us not dropping into the negative narrative that we maybe can give to ourselves at times. And that can also be tracked as well and watched, How do we speak to ourselves in challenging moments? Do we find that we're really negative to ourselves, or do we offer ourselves grace and compassion? That can all form part of a reflection within this practice. So rather than it being an invitation to criticize, it's more of an invitation to be curious about what our thoughts are doing and whether we are identifying with them or whether we're just witnessing them. And maybe witnessing them with kindness would be the best route. And as the saying goes, when we do reflect on things, it's best to reflect on it with understanding for ourselves and everyone else that we're all just kind of here on this planet doing the best job that we can with the tools that we have and the history that we have been grown from until we know different or until we choose different. So that allows me to move on now just from a little bit of a background towards what self-study is, or Svādhyāya, or self-reflection, or skill development, whatever you choose to be titled as. It allows me to move on to why is it so important? So I think when I think back of when I have reflected, it gives me a sense of empowerment to recognize that the things that I would like to change, I can change. And it also allows a moment of compassion, of being able to see the reasons why I maybe chose to respond or react in a certain way. But evidence also shows, and there's some great evidence out there on this topic, one in particular from Grant et al., who wrote a piece in 2002 on self-reflection and the insight scale. They found that when we reflect, it allows us to question assumptions that we have maybe been born into, or societal norms that we don't really understand the whys, but we've just taken up the same stance. So it allows us to really understand, why have I now chosen that stance? Is that something that I can evolve from or change, or can I understand it better so that I'm more intentional? But they also found that there was a greater sense of self, so being able to understand oneself better, and also having this idea of what our own inner values and moral compass looks like when we reflect, almost this inner knowing. And I think in today's time that is so vitally important, particularly with the rise of searches going on outside of ourselves, where we're regularly asking maybe artificial intelligence what the answers are for the dilemmas that we have. Self-reflection allows us to hear that inner guide once again, so that we don't keep having to look outside of ourselves, because the best answers that we will ever receive are the ones that feel most congruent to us, the ones that are there through our own values and guide. They also found that research into self-reflection offers this extra layer of self-worth, or maybe even the development of self-esteem. And through that, there was a higher overall well-being and psychological functioning. So it's not just a case of, let's just write a diary and reflect just for the good of it. It's actually backed by psychological science, that it has a purpose and a great amount of benefit if we do regularly have this as a practice. So how do we do it? How do we actually study ourselves? And how do we study ourselves with the grace that we deserve? So some simple practices that we could do could be, as I've said already, keep a journal or a diary. I did a really lovely podcast actually a few years back with Emma Deaker, who has her own journaling book that she had as the #1 bestseller on Amazon. And that was a really interesting show. So if you're interested in that, go back and listen to how journaling can help with discipline, productivity, and self-worth. We can also recognize through journaling what actually brings us the greatest amounts of joy day to day. And that's really important, allowing us to recognize where we get our glimmers of hope, what fills us up versus what drains us. It could be that we are able to take a walk, go for a walk with our headphones off. Maybe take the opportunity to just hear nature's sounds and look at the surroundings that you have. I'm lucky to be able to go and have walks around the coast, and I regularly do that, and I go and visit the seals. I'm sure many people are absolutely bored of my seal spam now, but I love going and just having that moment of time to look at something else that is of a natural worth in this world, and checking to see that they're all okay. I think I'm doing a bit of good, you see, when I go and look over at the seals, very quietly, of course, just to check that they're all looking nice and plump. And if they don't, I'll go and report it to the wonderful marine tribe. But yeah, having a walk, maybe taking the headphones out and just being present with your thoughts, and actually noticing the thoughts. They don't always have to be good thoughts that we have as part of this practice of self-study. And it's also really important to remember that the thoughts that come in, we don't always have to have them to be so positive. It could be that something maybe has frustrated you on the walk, and that's part of the self-study, is recognizing why that triggered, how that triggered, and allowing it to just be witnessed rather than judged. Another great way of self-study is, of course, being able to meditate, even if that's just for 5 minutes. I like to set up a little bit of a timer. I normally do require a little bit of white noise music in the background to allow me to channel out the thoughts a little bit. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about meditation is that we have to sit there in silence and not have any thoughts at all. But actually, it's the opposite to that. It's being able to recognize that thoughts have arrived, and then we can return back to, normally for me, it's the breath, or maybe a mantra that allows us to gain this self-discipline of returning back to the moment. And also that every thought that comes in doesn't need a reaction. Digital free time is another wonderful way of being able to reflect and have self-study. How many times when we are sat on our own now, or even in company, where we should really be engaged either with ourselves, the boredom of just being able to sit with ourselves seems to be so vacant now, but how many times have we sat in our own company or with the company of others and picked up the phone just to check what notifications have come in, or maybe in the hope that something might come in just to distract us away from being present with ourselves. And that in itself, I think, requires us to understand why we're doing that. What are we trying to move away from? What are we afraid to sit with? Is another good way of recognizing in that digital free time. It could only, it could just be 5 minutes a day that allows us to connect to self-study. Another little tip would be to do your own PDR. So if, like me, and you're self-employed, or you're maybe a student and you don't get to have personal development reviews with your tutors or your lectures, do one yourself, or find out when your next one is when you're in work. If it's not an annual thing, see if you can schedule one in, because there is real areas for growth within these development reviews that we get a sense of pride and self-respect. Being able to do our own little writing down of all of the things that have been done so well this year, or maybe this quarter, or even this month. Might be something that you want to do monthly. And also, where are the areas of continued development? What do I want to continue to evolve with? What do I maybe want to let go of? And each day, this would be my final little practice for this week, is finish the day with this question. What lessons have I learnt today? It doesn't have to be profound. It can be something really small. But what have I learnt from today? What obstacle have I been able to move out of my own way? And it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, it doesn't have to have been a perfect day. It doesn't have to be a day where everything has gone swimmingly. It could be a really great day, and there could still be something that within that you've learnt, which it might even be just to have enjoyed the day, to have been present with the day. And by doing that, we build in this regular habit of checking in with ourselves. So those would be my recommendations for this week of how we can offer ourselves opportunities to self-study. Keep noticing how you speak to yourself, even when it goes wrong. Notice sensations in the body when maybe we feel a bit overwhelmed. Recognize the habits that nourish and drain you. And breathe. Breathe as much as you possibly can, and don't waste your breaths. Allow this to be a practice that stays with you every day. So that's it for today. A nice, short but sweet episode to bring in the return of the Feel Good Club podcast. I wish you a wonderful week filled with love, compassion, and liberation. And thank you so much for listening. Please share it with your friends or whoever you think it may help or resonate with. And I look forward to seeing you here next week, back with a new theme, a new practice to return to, and we'll keep practicing together again and again. Om Shanti. Peace out.